So welcome back, everyone. I'm glad that so many of you stayed. Um, and I wanted to talk this night about medicine and healing. And I also wanted to say that I want to talk about traditions that are not necessarily Theravada. Um, when I first came to Buddhism, I thought there was one Buddhism. I was very naive and very ignorant. And in the last year or so, I've come to understand not only that there are many different schools of Buddhism, but I've also come to understand that many of the Asian American Buddhist traditions that first came to this country have been marginalized in the Western convert Theravadan style Buddhism. So let me just say a couple of things about the names. So the three major schools of Buddhism are Theravada, which is the way of the elders. And these are teachings and practices that are said to be based on the teachings of the Buddha. However, these teachings were only written down 600 years after the Buddha died. And the teachings before were oral. And it's said that when he was dying, the Buddha said to Ananda, you can let the minor teachings go and keep the major. But he didn't say, or Ananda didn't know which were the major and which were the minor. So what we do have in Theravada teachings are primarily teachings that relate to the monks and to meditation. And not a lot, some, but not a lot about householders. Approximately 500 or so years after this Buddha's death, Mahayana Buddhism arose. And if Theravada emphasizes monastic practices and meditation, and the notion that we spend thousands of lifetimes practicing to become enlightened. Mahayana, which of course has many, many different traditions, believes that.
Okay, so I'm talking a little bit about the different traditions of Buddhism. So Mahayana really talks about that enlightenment is possible within our lifetimes. More than Theravada traditions, it brings in the concept of the divine feminine, of Tara or Quan Yin. It teaches that gender is not an impediment. Women, you do not have to necessarily be born in a male body to become enlightened, which the most conservative aspects of Theravada do hold. And the concept of the bodhisattva, the individual who could pass on to enlightenment, but vows to return as Tara did, lifetime after lifetime, until all sentient beings are free, are part of the core of Mahayana teachings. And then thirdly, we have Vajrayana traditions, and those are mainly in Tibet and Nepal, and they are part of the Mahayana tradition. So again, Tara is a Tibetan deity, but they emphasize secret teachings, hidden teachings, esoteric teachings. And the Dalai Lama is part of the Vajrayana tradition. So I want to say that most of us don't know that Jodo Shinsho Buddhism, which is one of the Mahayana traditions, had a temple established in San Francisco in 1898. Many of us are familiar, and some of us know better than this, with the first wave of Euro-American convert teachers who went to Asia in the 60s. They're the people who founded Insight Meditation and Spirit Rock. And they came back and adapted the Theravadan teachings, again, privileging meditation, and dropping some of the ceremonial and devotional practices. So many of the teachers here at East Bay have been trained in the Theravadan traditions. Some of us have been trained in other spiritual traditions, and many people may have roots in, have grown up in Buddhist homes, may have roots in Mahayana traditions, in Zen tradition, or in other traditions. Well, why am I mentioning all this? I'm mentioning all this because I think it's really important to know that there are Buddhists who chant, where instead of meditation, the major focus is on chanting. The people who chant Yam Nyam Renge Myoho Ko, which is the chant that some of us know that Tina Turner heard, and that chant helped give her the courage and the faith and the trust to leave an abusive relationship very suddenly on the eve of a concert, running out of a hotel room. She had been practicing chanting. There are Buddhists who practice chanting and go to sites across the world where there has been great injury and harm, and they chant and pray for the souls of the dead. We are living in really perilous and challenging times. While some of us thought that, well, if COVID restrictions are easing, everything should be great. I just want to ask you to, put a hand up, just not the raise hand function, if you are still a little uncertain as you are moving about in the world. Yeah, it's not as easy as we thought it would be. The anxieties that arose, the pandemic, the global health pandemic may or may not have eased. It's eased in some areas of the world, it's ramping up in others. But the pandemic of hate is still with us. If you're living in the United States, you can see that there is a great reaction to the power of people of color, to the fact that many, many, many people of color were able to vote in the last election. And there's an attempt to stop that, to disenfranchise people. And whether we want to or not, our fear, our doubt, our anxiety lives in our bodies. Our minds may be working, busy, busy working, or our minds may be full of anxiety. Illness, anxiety, discomfort, pain, death, disability are human conditions. They existed in the Buddhist time. The three examples that I brought from Mahayana traditions, the 12 vows of the medicine Buddha, the examples of Quan Yin and of Tara, are all ways that in looking at health and illness, that Buddhist cultures of 1,000, almost 2,000 years ago, have attempted to deal with the illnesses that not only affect our body, but the reaction to illness that we have that pervades our mind. When we look at the image of Tara, there is a particular Tara in the Tibetan tradition, white Tara. And the Taras are white, red, green, blue, black. They're in the tankas, they're different colors. And I'm saying this because there's not a preference over a lighter colored Tara is better than a darker colored Tara. That kind of colorism doesn't exist in the Tibetan tradition. And for those of us who are African American, we're really sensitive to issues of dark and light. But while green Tara is often seen as a protector, white Tara is often seen as the healer. Tara is said to protect from the great eight fears. And the fears are listed as fire, lions, elephants, snakes, imprisonment, floods, demons, and robbers. But these are said to be metaphors, so that the lion is the issue of pride. Fire is a metaphor for anger. Elephants are a metaphor for ignorance. Snakes for envy. I could go on, but not all of us can take all this in auditorily. But white tower protects us. Green tower protects us. And white Tara is the deity to whom one prays for a long life. And it's said that if you chant her name, if you chant her mantra, that she comes swiftly to your aid. And many of us don't know about chanting, but I want to say this because I have not been empowered or formally taught these traditions, but I know that they are home traditions for some of you. And there are traditions that others of you may want to explore. So there are teachings online, there are teachings on their web, and there certainly are sanghas in which these things are practiced. I know a little about Tara because one of my dissertation students wrote a very fine dissertation about Tara, and she chanted by the bedside as her mother was dying. And she said she took comfort in the fact that while her mother died, the teachings in Tibet are that are that anyone in the world, whether they are currently a difficult person, may have once been your most beloved mother. And in losing her mother, she took comfort in that fact that all around her were beings who may at some time in the past or sometime in the future been served her as her mother. It did not stop the grief of losing her mother. And grief is real and must be experienced and walked through before we can leave it. Now, if you're very close to enlightenment, and I welcome anyone on this call who is an enlightened being to share their teachings. But for most of us, we still experience grief and pain. And I want to say that while we have fears, some of our health issues are magnified by the fears that we have. And so I want to encourage all of us to be with the body. The body changes. I now have, at 72, more arthritis in my shoulder joints and knees than I had in my 30s. I still had some signs of arthritis back then. And I've just learned that I take joy in the times that the body doesn't ache. I notice it. I notice the difference between when the ache is deep and harsh and when the ache is light. And I take real joy in that there are exercises that help me alleviate the pains that are in the body. And so I want to encourage all of us as we've come into this period of sheltering in place and being so much online, we've been able to take advantage of many classes on the web and many classes at East Bay that deal with movement and healing movement. I want us to have some time to share. So I want to talk just a little bit about the 12 vows of the Medicine Buddha. And again, the Medicine Buddha is part of the Mahayana and the Vajrayana tradition. But in reading them, I was really struck by the similarities to what we know in our times. The Medicine Buddha made these 12 vows. One of them says, I vow to relieve all pain and poverty of the very sick and poor. The sick to be cured, the helpless to be helped, the poor to be assisted. And I want us to think about what it means for us who see every day those who are homeless, those who are sometimes the poorest of the poor, those who are often mentally challenged or challenged by trauma. My husband is a lawyer with the homeless, and he has heard stories. And how can any of us live in a white supremacist society and be healthy? How can we be healthy in mind and heart and spirit when so many messages come at us? One of the vows of the medicine Buddha, I vow to lead those who have gone astray back to the path of righteousness. Let them be corrected and return to the Buddha way for enlightenment. If we are struggling sometimes with difficult people and trying to let them know that some of their views, whether it's our family, difficult people at work, the ideas about people of color or other marginalized communities not being correct, we want to vow, like the medicine Buddha, to lead those who have gone astray back to the path of righteousness. And we can see this as being able to see clearly, to see with heartful awareness. Um, I wanted to say, I vow to save prisoners who have genuinely repented and victims of natural disasters. Those who are sincere will be blessed by my supreme power and freed from suffering. And I thought about that. My sister was in prison, and I worked at Highland Hospital when crack cocaine came into Oakland. And one of the things I learned that under the influence of their drug, cocaine addicted women took actions that when they came out of their high, they regretted. They were deeply, deeply sorrowful about them. And sometimes because what they had done was so awful to them, it had harmed their children, it had harmed their own bodies. They went to get high again so they could forget. All of this is understandable. We can say that hurt people hurt people. We can say, as Gibran said, when asked to speak of good and evil, what is evil but good tortured by its own thirst and its own hunger? All of us know that we can make mistakes. And while we talk of acts that are inhumane, acts committed by human beings are human acts. What restorative justice teaches is that if we can see our acts, admit that we have done them, see the harm they have caused, and repent, regret, then we come back into the human community and we can be part of our communities again. We can make restitution. We can serve the good, commit to serve the good. So these are only three things that I saw in these vows, but they felt so relevant for today. I mean, some of them, are about boundless wisdom and infinite light and all of those things. But the things that I read you, that we vow to help the sick and the poor. And yes, the language can be a little objectifying. I apologize if the intent, if the impact in using them has not landed well for you. But I want us to think about medicine. What is the medicine that we need for these times? And medicine does not always mean that we are cured. It means that we come into acceptance. It means that we come into balance. It means that we decide. Wilma Mankiller once said that you don't have to have your health to do what you came here to do. For those who don't know, she was the first female principal chief of the Cherokee Nation in modern times. She died, I think, in the last 5 or 7 years. And I heard her say that at a time that she'd been treated for cancer, had been in the hospital for a year. You don't have to have your health to do what you came here to do. Again, I just want to thank every one of you who sat with me tonight or lay down or however you were or stood. And in terms of dedicating the merit in recognition of the connection of all beings, I dedicate the merit of tonight's work to all those who are ill, all those who are struggling to regain health, for all those who are trying to find balance of the heart, the mind, the body, the psyche. I dedicate this to all those who are suffering from the great wounds of oppression, to all those who are suffering in the body from disease. I dedicate the merit of this to all of those who are suffering isolation, imprisonment, diseases of the mind, imbalances of the heart mind. May you be healed. May you be in balance. May you be well. May all beings in all dimensions, in all times, in all spaces be free, be at peace, be loved.